All right. Hello, AP Lit students. You're right. 4 years ago, I started on another one of these modeling exercises, and indeed got stuck doing other stuff. So, by popular demand, and because man, this COVID situation, you guys, I just want to say I'm with you, and so I will do my level best to get back into some thinking about this literature and think through where we were going with this video series. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the close reading. If you haven't done it, do Google the 2013 AP Literature Question 2 D.H. Lawrence, find this passage, read it. Okay? We're going to talk about reading. We're going to talk about annotation, which we can make way too big a deal out of sometimes. All right? We're going to annotate. All that means is write the things you note in the passage on the paper, right? Makes it easy to find later. And then we're going to look at the prompt and how we break that down, write a thesis statement, and then get on with it. Okay? That's the basic plan. I'll make another video in the next couple days for you guys. Again, we're gonna lose all the accoutrement, no, none of my awesome intro music. We're just gonna get down to how would we plan the essay, write it, and then we'll look at it. And I would encourage you to also look at the 3 example essays that the AP provides for this prompt as you prepare for your exam coming up. Geez, any day now. All right. So I want to remind you, prompt is up here. This is D.H. Lawrence, 1915 novel, The Rainbow, right? What we talked about at the end of the last video is write an essay in which you analyze how Lawrence employs literary devices to characterize the woman and capture her situation. If you remember, we talked through this in the last video, and go back and watch it if you haven't. Silly Cats Can't Play Tennis is a really awesome way to remember a series of core literary devices: setting, character, conflict, point of view, tone. If you're digging into this and you know some other basic devices, I think you're going to be able to do a good response to this. You don't need a bunch of terms in Greek to read and write about literature. Right? Literature is stories. We're born for stories. So let's get into this. Okay. As I read this initially, right away, if you look at this first phrase, or this first clause, it was enough for the men. Well, men are plural. Men is plural here. It was enough. Fancy term. It's a periodic sentence. The goodness comes at the end because it starts with it was. So let's look at what was enough. That the earth heaved and opened its furrow to them, and the wind blew to dry the wet wheat, and set the young ears of corn wheeling freshly round about. And it was enough that they helped the cow in labor, or ferreted the rats from under the barn, or broke the back of a rabbit with a sharp knock of the hand. Okay, agricultural setting, clearly the men, this is enough for them. Now, that could be kind of negative, but let's go on and sort of see. So much warmth and generating of pain and death did they know in their blood, earth and sky, and beast and green plants. So much exchange and interchange they had with these, that they lived full and surcharged, their senses full fed. Well, that sounds pretty good, actually. They lived full. They're not lacking anything. They're not really struggling with life. I mean, it's probably hard work. And their faces always turned to the heat of the blood, staring into the sun, dazed with looking toward the source of generation. I mean, this is Genesis level stuff. This is just basics of life, death, and they're always facing that. Now we get this moment here. It's almost like a sonnet if you studied poetry. We get this but. Oh, but the woman. So we got men plural. There's one woman. I'm looking for the woman because of the prompt. But the woman wanted another form of life than this, something that was not blood intimacy. Her house faced out from the farm buildings and fields, looked out to the road and the village with the church and the hall and the world beyond. She stood to see the far-off world of cities and governments and the active scope of man, the magic land to her, where secrets were made known and desires fulfilled. And it goes on. Now, if we were going to think about character, right, who do we have here? We have the men and the woman. So you could take a second and think, like, how would you describe them? What's happening here with them? And then we think about the setting. Well, it's clearly rural. The men are facing the earth. They're facing the sun. The woman, her house is there, but no, her house faces out from the farm buildings and fields. It's a really basic setting piece, Might feel like, it's too obvious. No, it's not. It's perfect. Get into that. That's on purpose, right? Authors construct text for a purpose. So this is pretty interesting. And there's two worlds here. There's that rural world, and then there's the world beyond, the magic land to the woman. So her situation is captured pretty clearly right away. There are some simple literary devices happening here too that I frankly love. Warmth and generating and pain and death in the first paragraph, that's a list. It's pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward. And for her, the road and the village with church and the hall and the world beyond. Oh, these are two different worlds with a lot in them. So that's kind of interesting stuff too. Okay? It's setting, it's character. Now let's think. Let's look down to the third paragraph here, line 30. Looking out as she must, again, setting, literally physically looking out, she must, from the front of her house toward the activity of man in the world at large, while her husband looked out the back at sky and harvest and beast and land. She strained her eyes to see what man had done in fighting outward to knowledge. So you can see, again, I've annotated here. The house faces out, we get the rural and the urban, but there's something here about actually knowledge and exploration. Her deepest desire hung on the battle that she heard in the top of the next column, far off, being waged on the edge of the unknown. She also wanted to know and be of the fighting host, fighting out there towards knowledge. So these men have a kind of knowledge, but the other scope of man is a different kind of knowledge, right? They're pushing the edge of the unknown. So you could just use those little snippets and quotations. You could start to note them, underline just the things that really grab you. Now, you could argue there's too much underlining here, but now I'm noting setting. I asterisked here, and again, my handwriting is terrible, guys, so bear with me. But this is something about her and her situation. She wants to know. She's in this land of living very fully, but in just the earth and the death and the sun and the life, or cities and creativity of a sort, knowledge. The next paragraph, we get the sort of the other character, although we do find the men go down to one man, Tom Brangwyn, we learn his name is at the end of the passage. But here we get our third character, who is the vicar. So let's look at him. At home, even so near as Cosette, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, was the vicar who spoke the other magic language and had the other finer bearing. The magic language. Finer bearing. That means he's sort of fancy. Both of which she could perceive but could never attain to. So it is actually beyond her. The vicar moved in worlds beyond where her own menfolk existed. So stuff that I notice here too is now we have the vicar and we have the men, and ultimately Brangwyn, who is her husband. There's a comparison that gets set up here. Look at, what is this, line 47. Whereas the vicar, dark and dry and small beside her husband. Not a lovely description. I don't think I want anyone to describe me that way. But had a quickness and a range of being that made Brangwyn, in his large geniality, his large niceness, seem dull and local. And local is actually an interesting description. I wrote local here next to comparison. She knew her husband, but in the vicar's nature was that which passed beyond her knowledge. So again, I think I'm noting this as a conflict between the known and the unknown. I mean, hey, maybe you are been living in your hometown for a long time, or maybe you're ready for the next thing, maybe not, but maybe you are. That could be a conflict we might actually relate to. Look at this. I put a sort of rectangle here in line 56. She craved to know. She craved to know. She craved to achieve this higher being, if not in herself, then in her children. So that's pretty interesting. I mean, this is definitely a conflict. It's a desire of her. This is part of her situation. And then again, she goes on with this comparison. That which makes a man strong, even if he be little and frail in body, just as any man is little and frail beside a bull, yet stronger than the bull, what was it? It was not money, nor power, nor position. She decided it was knowledge, a question of knowledge. And she even says down here, his soul was the master of the other man's. And why? Why? She decided it was a question of knowledge. So we got character, we got setting, We have really three characters here. If you see Brangwyn as just an example of all the men, the vicar and the woman. The comparison between the men tells quite a bit. And the woman, I think we're really learning this through her point of view. The men are characterized with knowledge. The vicar is characterized with knowledge, but also with not knowing. So there's something she doesn't know. So I'm going to see this point of view as third person limited. All of this characterization, you'll note there's no external dialogue in the piece. No one's talking to anybody else. So this is really her internal dialogue. The woman is the protagonist. She's experiencing the conflict around knowledge and desire for something new, searching the unknown versus this rich, full knowing of the land and that life. So if you start to think about tone, which we would describe or define as the relationship between the speaker and the subject, how does she sound? How would you describe the relationship between her and these men? How would you describe the relationship between her and the vicar, for example? Right? How would you describe her relationship with knowledge? It is something conflicted. We want to find language for that. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. Even in a physical setting sense, the in is the blood and the out is the world beyond and the knowledge. The in is the land and the blood, and the outward is that knowledge. So we can start to jot some of these things down, and I think we're going to find a way to respond to this prompt. So let's have a look. All right. How does Lawrence employ literary devices to characterize the woman to capture her situation? Well, internal dialogue. We've got these lists, and we can talk about some of that. All these comparisons. There's something to that. All right. So setting. House. And the land. So let's think about tone quickly. Okay. Tone with the men. I mean, they're well known. Was it genial, I think was the word that described her husband over here with his large geniality. Yeah, but which is a sort of as a warm adjective to describe him, but also dull and local in comparison to the vicar. And it's interesting to me that local gets that sort of negative connotation, that feeling of a negative descriptor. And if we think about tone towards the vicar, again, I mean, that's sort of an interesting one because in some ways he's like small and dry, but he's powerful and he also understands something. The woman, the men, do not. And that knowledge gives him power. So, I mean, she's a little bit in, maybe I use a word like, she's a bit in awe of the vicar. And the vicar is just, like a religious man, like a local priest or whatnot, a local pastor. Yeah, I think that's probably right. If we think about the land again, her tone towards her local environment, maybe it's sort of well, she understands it, but maybe she's a little bored. You could probably find proof for that. Certainly, the cities, towns, roads and whatnot beyond are alluring. She's again, she craves that knowledge and she craves that experience and I might say the unknown and pushing the edge of the unknown. Yeah, you can see that at the top of the second column. So this stuff this is all thinking through these core devices. Other devices we talked about, there's certainly no doubt that there's a lot of comparison, and comparison can set you up to have a sort of metaphorical relationship, you know. So the vicar is like the man, and the men are like the bull. They're stronger, but you know, man can lead a bull around. Man can control a bull. So we've got comparisons that become metaphors, that are metaphors, maybe as metaphor. I think that's really important. Those lists, that listing has some sort of effect. You know, you could describe it. It's again, there's a deep knowledge. She's thought about this. You know, she can just list and list and list all these traits. So the lists help characterize the woman as just a verbal device, but that's probably enough. Okay. Now, there's a pretty sweet trick that we can use to respond to this that we'll go over in the next one. So what we want to do is work towards a thesis statement here. Okay. How does Lawrence employ literary devices to characterize the woman and capture her situation? Well, I want to answer that question. And then I'm going to show you the chicken foot, which is in some of the other videos on the channel if you check them out, as a quick down and dirty way to organize this. I think we'll do it in the next one because it's getting a bit long. Yeah, why don't we think about what a quick answer to that might be. Come back in a couple of days and we'll get into it in the next video. Okay? Thanks, everybody. That's a close reading. That's just some basic annotation. That's how these devices work inside that passage for me. You might see it differently. Fair enough. Yeah, I'll see you next time when we'll answer this question, write a thesis statement, and do some organization. Good luck preparing for the exam, everybody.